You catch yourself pausing before you speak, just for a second, not because you're slow, but because you're already watching yourself. You notice the shift in your own tone before the other person does. That's not a small thing, but most people never think to name it. There's a version of self-awareness that gets confused with overthinking. The two look similar from the outside, but they're not the same thing. Overthinking spins without landing anywhere useful or clear. Self-awareness watches the spin and asks, what's actually happening here? Most people move through their days without checking the machine at all. They feel something, react to it, and call that being authentic. You do something different, and it costs you something, honestly. It slows you down in conversations where others just barrel through. You hesitate before sending a message you know is slightly passive-aggressive. You notice you're doing it, which doesn't always mean you stop. But the noticing is there, and that alone sets something apart. Here's the first sign, and it looks almost like a flaw from outside. You're the person who apologizes and actually means it when you do. Not the reflexive sorry that people use like punctuation in every sentence. A real one, where you've already run the event back in your head, where you saw your part in it before anyone had to point it out. That internal audit happens quietly, sometimes at 2 in the morning. You're replaying the conversation, not to feel bad, but to understand it. Most people replay conversations to build a case for themselves. You replay them looking for the moment you contributed to the friction. That's uncomfortable, it's not fun, it doesn't feel like a strength. But it's the reason your relationships tend to go slightly deeper over time. The second sign is something you probably don't advertise at all. You know when you're performing versus when you're actually being yourself. There's a version of you that shows up in certain rooms, and it's competent. It's agreeable. It says the right things at exactly the right volume. And there's a moment, usually driving home or standing in a shower later, where you go, that wasn't quite me, that was a version I put on. Most people don't have that moment. They are whoever the room makes them. You carry that quiet split, and sometimes it's exhausting to hold. But it means you have a self to return to, which is not obvious for everyone. The third sign tends to come up in arguments or small daily frictions. You get triggered, genuinely. Your jaw gets tight and your chest gets hot. And somewhere underneath the reaction, you're already watching it happen. Not neutralizing it, not performing calm, but witnessing your own charge. You think, okay, something snagged, what was it actually about? Not always immediately, sometimes it takes an hour, sometimes a day, but you come back to it and you locate the real thing under the reaction. Most people stay at the surface, they felt hurt, so the other person was wrong. You stay with the discomfort longer than that, and it changes what you find. That's not easy. It's a habit that builds slowly, without much applause. It's the kind of thing no one sees you doing, because it all happens inside. But it shapes every relationship you have, quietly, over a long time. The fourth sign is one people closest to you might actually find frustrating. You don't take compliments at face value without running a small check inside. Not because you're fishing for more, but because you want to know if it's true. Someone says you handled that well, and your first move is to verify it yourself. Did you actually handle it well, or did you just get lucky with the outcome? That internal honesty is rarer than most people assume it is. Most people collect compliments like evidence that they're finally enough. You collect them more carefully, which sometimes looks like low self-esteem. It isn't. It's a refusal to outsource your self-assessment entirely to other people. That distinction matters, even if it's hard to explain at a dinner table. The fifth sign is the quietest one, and it lives inside your language. You've started catching yourself when you use the word always or never. He always does this. She never listens. I always end up here somehow. You hear it the moment it leaves your mouth, or sometimes just before. And something in you flags it as a slight exaggeration, a small distortion. Because you know the brain reaches for those words when it wants to feel justified. When it wants the story clean and simple and entirely someone else's fault. Self-aware people feel that pull too, the same as everyone else does. The difference is they notice the reach, and sometimes they don't take it. That half second of friction between impulse and action is what you've built. It doesn't make you passive. It doesn't mean you stop having opinions. It means your opinions get slightly more accurate before they leave your mouth. The sixth sign is one that used to confuse you, maybe still does sometimes. You can hold two contradictory things about yourself without completely falling apart. You know you're generous, and also that you're generous partly to feel needed. You know you're honest, and also that you use honesty sometimes as a shield. You don't collapse those two things into one or pretend the second isn't real. Most people can only hold the flattering version for very long stretches. The uncomfortable version gets filed away, or blamed on stress, or a bad week. You keep both on the table, and it makes you harder to idealize, including by yourself. That's psychologically uncomfortable. It requires tolerating a blurry self-image, but it's also why you don't tend to be blindsided the way others sometimes are. When something in your behavior gets pointed out, there's often a small part of you that goes, yeah, I knew that was in there, I just hadn't named it yet. That recognition isn't failure, it's the system working the way it should. The seventh sign runs underneath all the others, and it's worth staying with. You have a complicated relationship with your own emotions, not a clean one. You don't trust every feeling immediately as a perfect signal of what's real. You feel anxious, but you check whether the anxiety is about something actual, or whether it's your nervous system running an old script from years back. You feel certain, but you pause long enough to ask if the certainty is earned. That doesn't mean you're disconnected from your emotions or cold about them. It means you've learned that feelings are information, not always instructions. Most people treat every emotional reaction as proof of something external. If I feel disrespected, then I was disrespected. Full stop, no further inquiry. You leave a small gap there, and in that gap is where your clarity lives. That gap isn't detachment. It isn't suppression or overthinking dressed up nicely. It's the difference between being run by your inner weather and reading it. And reading it, even imperfectly, changes how you move through almost everything. Here's what people get wrong about self-awareness, and it's worth correcting now. They think it means you have yourself figured out, that you've arrived somewhere stable. You haven't. That's not what this is. Self-awareness isn't a destination you reach. It's more like a muscle that occasionally cramps and sometimes gets things wrong. You still react badly sometimes. You still avoid things you should probably face. You still have blind spots, just slightly fewer, and you find them slightly faster. The self-aware person in the room isn't the calmest or the most certain one. They're often the one sitting with the most questions about their own behavior. That discomfort is the whole point. The questions are the sign, not the answers. There's a cost to this that nobody really talks about in the clean summaries. When you see yourself clearly, you also lose certain comfortable stories about yourself. The story where you were simply the wronged one, the patient one, the misunderstood one. Some of those stories were protecting something real, and losing them is genuinely hard. But what comes through on the other side is something more solid than a story. It's a kind of steadiness that doesn't depend on everyone agreeing with your version. You can be wrong, and it doesn't destroy the floor beneath you. You can be seen, fully, including the contradictions, and still feel okay about existing. That's not confidence the way it gets sold in short videos and highlight reels. It's quieter than that. It shows up as a reduced need to constantly manage perception. Less energy spent on controlling what people think, more on what you're actually doing. Less explaining yourself to people who weren't really asking, more honest silence. The behavior signs you've been carrying, the pausing, the self-checking, the noticing, they aren't personality quirks or signs that you think too much about yourself. They are evidence of a mind that learned to look inward without completely flinching. That took time, probably more than you got credit for from anyone around you. Most of that work happened privately, in rooms no one else was in, at hours no one saw. The replaying, the revising, the quiet recognition of your own part in things. None of that shows up on the outside in ways people easily praise or reward, but it accumulates, and the person you are in difficult moments reflects it. The way you handle being misunderstood, the way you recover after you get it wrong, the way you stay curious about yourself instead of just defending the current version. That's the thing self-awareness actually builds. Not perfection, not peace, not certainty. Just a person who keeps looking honestly even when the looking is uncomfortable. One thing worth saying clearly before this ends, nothing here is professional advice. If something in this video opens something heavier for you personally, that matters. A real conversation with a therapist or counselor will go further than any video can. This is reflection, not treatment, clarity, not diagnosis, a mirror, not a map. But if you recognized yourself in these signs, that recognition is already something, not because it makes you better than people who don't examine themselves this way, but because it means you're paying attention to the person you're actually becoming. And that quiet attention, sustained over a long time, is not nothing. It is, in fact, one of the more difficult and underrated things a person can do.